I want to bring up maybe another specific Indian that you could talk about. I know this is something that many people have touched on. Guilt. So there's some people like to call it guilt versus shame, or Jewish guilt, Christian guilt, good guilt, bad guilt. I don't know. Could you open that up? And especially you mentioned that one of those core emotions was guilt. And the truth is that if you would have asked me to make a list of core emotions, I don't know if I would have thought that guilt would initially be on there, because guilt is seems like a pretty complicated one. So
yeah, it actually wasn't always on the list. It was kind of like an add-on. But
where's
I realized
that list from,
that
by the way?
It's
your list?
No. The list, Arthur Janov talks about primal feelings, but he has 5, and the guilt was added on by some of his students, and my teacher also felt it was very powerful. And the Jews, of course, felt it was very powerful. The Jews and the Catholics and the Mormons. But guilt is really, really big. And one way of looking at it is realize underlying all of them in a certain way. And I found in my work, I didn't always have the confidence to say this, but after doing this private work for many years now already, I could say that at the end of the journey, often it's the guilt that people are really left with. That's the core nut to crack, if you will. So, I mean, let's just say this also because it's an important piece of information. Often the anger for men is like a natural feeling. We're allowed to feel it. Boys are allowed to be angry. Girls are allowed to be sad. So girls have a harder time admitting they're angry, and boys have a harder time admitting they're sad, right? It's more vulnerable, it's more weak. And girls have a harder time admitting they're angry because girls aren't allowed to be angry. They're allowed to be sad, which creates a lot of angry women. They're not allowed to feel it. But, and a lot of sad boys. So there's kind of like this thing that happens that when you feel a feeling and you kind of deal with it, then the next vulnerable feeling will come up. So if you're angry and you're done feeling the anger and you're really at peace with all of your anger, underneath the anger is often a protective feeling, right? It's often like fight or flight. It's like, or freeze, but it's like the strength that you get when you get angry. So it's like a protective, a defensive feeling. After that, often is I'm scared. It's interesting to note that more violent crimes are committed because of fear than anger. Because when I'm in anger, I'm in a way more control. And I have less of a need to act impulsively when I'm so angry. But when I'm scared, I can do crazy things. I can be really violent and dangerous because I feel so out of control that I need to control by maybe hurting someone else, dominating someone else. So that's interesting. It's even more scary and dangerous to feel fear. And underneath that, often underneath, what am I scared of? So often I'm scared of maybe feeling sad, or I'm scared of feeling bad. I'm scared of admitting that I'm bad. Now, sometimes guilt is real. Like you said, I did something wrong. But what happens to me when I make a mistake is I internalize it and I say I am a mistake. It becomes global. It like spreads over everything. Because I suppressed it, I lost touch with it and it kind of spread everywhere. Or unfortunately, sometimes mechanchim, parents maybe, didn't give us the message that this was a mistake, but you're not a mistake. You failed, but you're not a failure. Sometimes kids, we get such an intense message of a failing that we become a failure. And we internalize and we make it about me because we're so egocentric, because we're, that's how we work. So that's a big problem. We have to learn how to make that lumdisha palgina, which is because I failed doesn't make me a failure. So there is a fair amount of coming back to Hashem, and this is where trust really comes in big. To be able to admit to God my failings means I really trust Him, right? I'm safe with Him to tell Him that I failed in all these ways. So when I can do that, sometimes we don't want to admit it because we don't want to change. Because my activity that I'm doing is protecting me. And there are layers to all of this. We can't, we can't go into too much of it. But once a person is able to admit that they failed in something, that's when he can forgive himself. The forgiveness will come in once he's able to accept that bad feeling. And then comes a voice, but you're not bad. Because your neshama is always there for you. This pristine part of you, you can never make bad. Yes, maybe you damaged yourself. Maybe you drank and you hurt your body. Maybe you weakened yourself. Maybe you made yourself, and you created a certain amount of, you lost time by not learning and by not doing mitzvahs. Maybe there's a lot to regret. You always have to go back to that core self. Who am I really? Really, I'm a neshama. And my neshama is still and always capable of greatness and turning everything around. Like Rav Elazar ben Durdai, flipping it all around. Vina'afach, really becoming great, even in a moment, even in a few days of crying, you can really do it, but you have to cry. Sometimes you have to cry to get to that place of knowing how good you really are. When people say, but I'm not good, Yochanan. I did this, I did that. And sometimes they get pretty convincing arguments. They did some pretty bad things, So sometimes I chide them. I say, no dead bodies, right? So let's not be too hard on yourself. But really, sometimes they have a laundry list which is hard to deal with. And I remind them that there's a part of them which is a chelik al-kami mal. There's a part of them which is God. You're essentially good. Your core is good. These are things you've done. But you are good. And when you can really tap into who you really are, and even more so, you can tap into what Hashem did. Hashem made you. Hashem gave you all these nisyonos. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't make mistakes. He didn't, mess that one up. He's going to become a serial killer. No. Hashem made you. Hashem is good. It starts with that faith, with that belief. And obviously most Ruba de Ruba of my clients believe in God. So it's not so hard for them. They can believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really does good and start with me. He made me good. When I tap into that essential goodness, I can kind of heal my guilt. Some of it is appropriate because I did something wrong, and the rest of it is just because I've assumed I'm bad because I did bad things. A lot of it is also superimposed by bad chinuch.
Guilt means like when I feel like I am bad and I am not worthy and I'm not good enough and all that. So what we're saying is that we want to recognize our failures for what they are and saying they are wrong and we do need to fix them. And yes, it was a bad thing to do, but it doesn't mean that I am essentially bad.
Right. And also to be mamtik a little bit that din on yourself, because you have to realize we're so critical because we've been taught to criticize also, but also because it's like our go-to. We as natural human beings, we want to succeed, and when we don't, we give ourselves a hard time because there's such a drive to succeed. Because the subconscious and our neshama is always trying to get us to be light, and because we know deep down we are light, it's very hard to cope with the little bit of dots that we have. Because you have something so pristine, it's like something's not pristine. It's like very, traumatic in a way. So I like to be mamtik the din on ourselves by saying, give it a little bit of context. Yes, you did that bad thing. Did you really want to do that bad thing? Or did you have a compulsion? You felt like you needed to. Did you lie because you thought, I'm going to mess this person over? Because you were scared. When I was a kid, I lied all the time. And even now, my wife sometimes looks at me and says, you don't have to lie to me. I love you. I care about you. I'm like, really? You do? You're not gonna be upset with me? No, I'll say, where were you? Oh, I was here and I was there. I'll be home at 9:15, like 9:45. I come home. Where were you? Oh, she's like, just tell me you bumped into a friend and maybe you sat on the street corner and schmoozed and you didn't necessarily think about me. It's okay. I accept you. And that for me, obviously the safety of a good relationship is amazing. A lot of people don't have that. And it's hard. We have to do that for ourselves. I bless everybody to have that in their life, and I do now, and it's really helpful for me. But if you don't have that, if you're with someone who's always angry at you for small infractions, well, then you do have to really be that lover of self for yourself and remind yourself, you didn't lie, you didn't do that mistake because you wanted to, you were just scared. Why were you scared? Oh, I'm scared because when I was a kid and I didn't curse out the window, I got my kippah thrown on the floor, or other primal scenes, I call it, other times in your childhood where you were really violated. And it's the times when you were violated that taught you not to trust the world. And because you don't trust the world, you sometimes do other things to fill that hole. They say to fill the God-sized hole. So really, we try filling it with other things, but we realize it's a God-sized hole. It can only be filled with God. It can only be filled with that love of self and self-acceptance. But I have a hole, and I've yet to meet a person who doesn't have that hole. Some holes are bigger than others, but there's no one who doesn't have that hole. We're designed by the great designer to have that hole, to fill it with him. So